Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal, and the War Within expansion launches in less than 3 weeks from today. This means that our classes need to be in tip-top shape in just such a short window before the launch of Season 1 content of the War Within expansion. And with that, on the recent beta build, we saw a whole slew of different buffs and adjustments, and mostly improvements for a variety of different classes. One of those classes, which has seen probably the most amount of changes throughout this expansion's development, has been the class of Mage, as Frost, Fire, and Arcane are continuing to see even more additional changes as of this week, with the Arcane Mage community standing strong for their spec, which has seen probably the most amount of changes out of all the different specs in this game thus far, with them asking Blizzard to keep a well-known, well-established bug that's been part of the Arcane Mage gameplay for the last couple of years, and Blizzard actually got a response as of this week. As always, if you guys want to see more regular class updates like these over for the War Within beta, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. Otherwise, let's dive right in. So when getting into some of the more generalized changes, starting off with hero specs, we're for the most part seeing adjustments, or rather buffs, for the spec of Frost Mage, which is really good to see, as they're really trying to make sure that the spec doesn't fall too far behind Fire and Arcane, which historically so far over the last few weeks and even months on the beta have been what felt like the most paid attention to specs, the ones that get the most amount of rework and the most amount of adjustments, and we've been seeing a lot of them over in the beta. But I think Frost Mage actually has got ahead of one of those two specs, but they're still trying to make sure that they're reinforced nicely, with Frostfire Living Bomb damage being increased to 100 and actually 75% for your Frost Mages instead of 100%. Right now this number is up to 150, but that may just be a tooltip error more than anything. They are trying to make sure the Living Bomb, which was kind of inadequate for Frost Mages in terms of AoE, is actually doing some decent damage, so hopefully that'll still be tuned going forward. For Spellslinger, we got even more additional changes for Frost Mages in particular, such as controlled instincts for Frost Mage. The cleave damage of this ability is being increased to 30%, up from 20%, so even more additional improvements, as well as the volatile magic AoE damage, which has been increased by 100%, which overall are a nice bit of adjustments for this spec in particular. For Arcane in particular, we did also see another hero spec adjustment, primarily for their Sun Fury playstyle, and I've actually got to give it a try. Yeah, Spellslinger is definitely a little bit more interesting with the spell Frost Teachings, Arcane Orb, resets and whatnot, but Sun Fury isn't that bad either. The Phoenix itself can actually do a significant amount of overall damage, and this thing doesn't really fall that far behind. I mean, I guess Meteorite also should be added, so actually once you combine all of the different effects that are part of Phoenix's damage, like Phoenix by itself looks like it's 7.7, but if you were to add Meteorite as well as the improved Barrages combo, I mean, this thing actually isn't that bad from being able to actually play with it. It is not as nuanced or as interesting as Spellslinger rotationally, but the Sun Fury does give you a much bigger bang of a combo every time you burst. So that is super nice. The Arcane Phoenix itself, the actual pet, has had its AoE spell damage increased by 30%. So some of the abilities such as AoE Barrage, I believe, as well as the Flame Strike ability, those have been increased by 30%. But also the Arcane Surge proc by the Phoenix, which is one of the more exceptional spells by the Phoenix, has also been increased by 30%. So the Phoenix by itself actually does a significant amount of damage. And you can see kind of some of the different abilities that it ends up using, from GPI to Arcane Surge, and everything kind of hits for a decent bit now. It is going to be interesting to me in particular which one of the two hero specs players will end up picking. I think numerically one of them is probably going to win over the other, but if given the choice and if they were closer, I do think Spellslinger is actually just a slightly bit more interactive with the resources compared to Sun Fury. I think Sun Fury bursts at the very end with its Memory of Alar that gives it Arcane Soul, where you can just spam barrages back to back. Plus, if you can go for the execute barrages, that could also be kind of interesting, but one of it feels more like a setup cooldown base, and the other feels more like rotationally interesting for Arcane. But it's really interesting how my favorite spec of Mage, Arcane, has gotten some what I think are fairly solid options. And I play a lot of classes. Like, if you really want to look at classes that don't really have a lot of good options, look at Rogue, when you have things such as Trickster with a capstone that just absolutely isn't that fun to play with. And then you have Mage right here that does really give you a bit of a grass is greener on the other side type of moment. Then we get changes for the Arcane Mage in particular, starting with our Mastery of Savant, which plays around with your mana regeneration and maximum mana. It also empowers the Arcane charges to increase the effectiveness of abilities such as Arcane Blast and Barrage, as well as all other damage by Arcane abilities. The Barrage and the Arcane Blast damage scaling has been adjusted. So Mastery scaling for Barrage is increased by 100%. While Arcane Blast mastery scaling increased by 50%. This is primarily to try to get mages to utilize that stat more effectively, and this becomes even more important when you play into Prodigious Savant at this bottom right whole section of the cap or of the talent tree, because Prodigious Savant further increases the effectiveness of that mastery for those abilities, so that can also stack up with this effect further, making mastery a better stat. And I think trying to promote this whole bottom right hand side of the talent tree as well with the Late Drinker Cleave from Nether Precision Blast. So that is going to make the ability a little bit better in that regard, but the damage of Barrage and damage of Blast have also been reduced a little, I think, just to make sure that there's some scaling. I think what they're not trying to do is not really trying to make those abilities hit harder, but rather trying to create more mastery opportunities and more talent, or try to allow certain talents to shine, if that makes any sense. Barrage reduced by 8%, Blast reduced by 6%, but the mastery scaling should, I feel like, more than make up for it. Arcane Familiar damage has also been adjusted. The Arcane Familiar damage has been increased by 50%, and that should make Energized Familiar a little bit stronger of a talent. I get to play with it a little bit. The damage is, I mean, it's familiar. I don't think it's going to be doing anything crazy when it comes to its overall damage output. There was also a bug that was recently kind of fixed, quote unquote, where it was a bug that allowed Nether Precision to be double dipped when it comes to spell queuing, which was initially an unintended quote-unquote mechanic for Arcane mages, but it's been in the game for multiple years and it never gotten fixed, to the point where a lot of players assumed it's almost like a mechanic part of the spec. It has been core to this playstyle for a long while now. With them trying to fix it, it takes away some of that nuance out of the mage, and overwhelmingly the community hated this fix. They actually asked for it to be reverted, and they listened. With the expansion arriving in just a handful of weeks, these are the moments that are crucial right now, is them listening to the community feedback, and they've adjusted. They're most likely gonna take away some damage away from Arcane mages in other forms, but this whole Nether Precision spell queuing thing, that is here to stay as a mechanic, and they'll just have to adjust the spec accordingly. But this is a good thing either way. The fact that they're listening to feedback and making adjustments based on community, a lot of mages want the spec to feel as good as it can be, and this is one of those mechanics that didn't take away from the spec. It actually made it kind of more nuanced. So I'm very happy to see that they ended up listening, with mages winning yet again with yet another set of updates. Outside of Arcane, we got Fire mages also getting a few adjustments. Last week, we got a pretty sizable change for Fire mages, specifically to how their Lit Fuse and Living Bomb ability works. So they wanted to adjust Living Bomb, and last week's changes saw Living Bomb getting an 100% damage increase, but abilities such as Lit Fuse, Explosive Ingenuity, and Explosivo proc rates all have been reduced by 50%. The ability of Living Bomb then became capped to 8 targets, so you could immediately put it up on 3 targets, and then Living Bombs explode and they reapply to a maximum of 5 targets. So the maximum amount of enemies that can be affected by Living Bomb is 8 targets total. This was primarily to keep and maintain the damage and effectiveness of Living Bomb. However, they also wanted to improve the game's performance, because when you have a bunch of enemies all with Living Bomb, that's a lot of instances of explosions that hit all enemies in like a quadratic fashion. So that just ends up creating a lot of load on the game, and actually can tank your performance when it comes to big group content like massive AoE cleaves in things such as Mythic Plus dungeons or even in raids. So they wanted to maintain the effectiveness of Lit Fuse and Living Bomb without allowing it to spread out of control. So 100% damage increase was a lot, and we saw a lot of Fire mages doing some ludicrous damage last week. This week, however, they're coming back with this and then nerfing the damage of Living Bomb by 75%. So the most amount of damage you can get out of Living Bomb is maybe 25% out of that initial buff going with the nerf. Then also Lit Fuse proc chance has been reduced by 4%, as well as Explosive Ingenuity proc chance reduced to 3%. So they actually further reduced the effectiveness of Living Bomb. And running around with it and playing it with it in dungeons, I am too used to Living Bomb being an effective portion of my damage, even in smaller target counts, and doing a bit of decent damage on single target even to some degree, since Living Bomb kind of sort of replaces your mastery of Ignite to some degree, or at least has been for a couple of builds. But this version of Ignite, it is noticeable. It is a jarring like 180 change where the ability went from doing a ton of damage to doing like very, very little damage unless you're doing some big pulls and mass amounts of enemies grouped up together for Living Bomb to gain value. The biggest change to the Fire Living Bomb playstyle is just it became an ability that does jarringly amounts of underwhelming damage all in a matter of a build. There's also a ton of talents that mages have invested to and can invest into to make Living Bomb so strong. So investing like 6 to 7 talent points into the ability and having to do this little damage, it just makes it go from, okay, this is an interesting part of my toolkit that I can integrate, to, all right, this thing on its own cannot stand on its own 2 feet. Maybe there'll be an opportunity for me just to mix together Living Bomb and Mastery of Ignite, or Living Bomb and Flame Strikes to supplement damage, but it seems like one of those things when it comes to the tuning of this thing, they just are having a really hard time getting it. This also doesn't help that Fire Mages right now have a ton of different bugs to still deal with on the beta, which should hopefully be finished out and ironed out by the time at least the Season 1 content arrives. That being said, it does make Fire Mages feel a little bit weaker than they currently could be, thanks to a lot of these different bugs that are resulting in slight different damage decreases here and there. But for Living Bomb, they can either solve it through 2 methods, either finding a middle ground between the damage where it's not quite as underwhelming as it is right now, but also not quite as overpowering as it was last week, somewhere down in the middle, or to increase the proc rate of this ability so it happens a lot more regularly. But right now, Fire Mages with Living Bomb not feeling that great, though hopefully we'll see even more adjustments in the future. Finally, we got a couple of adjustments for the Spec of Frost. We already talked about the Spellslinger and Frostfire, so those are going to be obvious buffs for the Spec of Frost, but they also wanted to kind of rein in Death's Chill. So they increased the amount of stacks that Death's Chill can stack up to from 12 to 15. With every single stack during Death's Chill with a Frostbolt, increasing your spell damage. However, while they increase the amount of stacks that you can gain for your spell damage, they reduce the amount of spell damage you got per stack from 2 to 1. So you went from gaining like a 24% damage increase when you fully stacked up Death's Chill to now a maximum of 15. So it's going to take you a second longer, cast longer to get it fully stacked up, but you're now going to get quite a bit less benefit out of it. This is an obvious nerf, but not one that is met with a lot of negativity. This is actually one of the better changes because otherwise that talent was going to be mandatory in single target encounters, in AoE encounters, everywhere, and that requires for mages to play around this ramp up. The ramp up in AoE content isn't bad, and even with these changes, it still should be a serviceable talent going forward because the ramp up doesn't take nearly as long to achieve. But in single target encounters, you're looking at 15 Frostbolts or even 12 Frostbolts that you first have to ramp up before you can begin your rotation. This is a change that makes the talent a little bit weaker, but it opens up more options for Frost Mages going forward to have a bit more variety when it comes to builds, and that is usually preferred by the community rather than seeing just one build that works for every type of encounter. So while it's a nerf, it is one of the better nerfs that still keeps the talent relevant and strong in certain scenarios. Besides this, abilities such as Ray of Frost are seeing I believe a 20% damage buff. I have my notes right here, but I wonder if this will be enough to potentially make Splintering Ray maybe decent, maybe with Quiet Pathy. Possibly. I don't see a lot of people really playing Splinter and Ray in Mythic Plus all that often. Usually it's the good old Glacial Spike, Coldest Snap, Death's Chill kind of a staple combo. Yeah, I wonder if this will be enough potentially to give them a little bit more build variety when it comes to some of their talent choices. But yeah, quite a bit of a cutback for Frost Mages in particular. But with everything being said, I do want to thank you guys very much for checking out this recent update, and I do hope all of you enjoyed. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like. I would very much appreciate it. It would help me out to reach out more people in the algorithm, but also join our channel Discord community. The link to that will be found in the description of every single one of our videos. We would love to have you guys join our community. And also let me know your thoughts about all of these changes from the community-based feedback changes for the Spec of Arcane. Let me know what are your thoughts about the nerfs that happened to the ability of Living Bomb, and what other changes would you want to see for the Spec of Frost Mage going forward. Let me know all of the thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you for watching, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.